I actually was tricked into working here. So one of the founders, Paige Todd, sent me an email and said, hey, I'd like to pick your brain about marketing. And I was like, sure, let's do it. So we were having breakfast talking about what we would do with marketing here at Flock, and she was just asking me questions. And then I realized about halfway through that she was actually interviewing me for a job. And I asked her the question. I said, wait, is there a job that you want me to work at Flock? And she was like, are you open to it? And I jumped at the opportunity. And the reality is because I thought man, Flock would be a really cool thing if it worked out. And I knew Garrett, I knew Matt, I knew Paige, I kind of knew this team. And my perspective was they're pretty good at willing things into existence. And me being a person, grew up on the West Coast, live on the South here for a while. And my perspective was really if this becomes a thing, Flock safety becomes a real thing, I would like to be a part of helping make sure that it does good for all of us. And that there are people on the inside of the company who are asking questions that are hard questions that help the company be better and make sure that we stay on the rails.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but you had not worked in law enforcement. You had not worked in public safety. You had not worked in sort of any of these spheres. What really sold you on, okay, yes, I want to spend the next 8-10 years of my life working on this problem?
Yeah, well, despite my physical appearance, that's true. I'm not actually a former cop. But yeah, I think the thing that really struck me is I didn't want to be the type of person who sat on the sidelines of hard problems and tweeted out the things that made me mad if they weren't going the way I wanted them to go. I wanted to be the type of person that put my money where my mouth was and actually worked on problems that I thought were hard problems to solve. And I think that when you consider crime in society, that's one of these problems that I think is a really difficult problem to solve. And to me, it got me very excited about the opportunity to work on a problem like that.
Yeah, I think a couple years later when you hired me at Flock, one thing that really got me was when Garrett said, and you repeated this, we're not here to solve dopey problems, right? We're here to solve some of the biggest problems that society faces. And by that time, we were working with law enforcement, including working with neighborhoods as well. So talk to me about the company's evolution of starting to work with all of these different stakeholders.
Yeah, when we first started at Flock, I think that the opening pitch that Garrett had was, we're going to work with neighborhoods to partner with police to solve crime. And that's actually how the company was started, was in Garrett's backyard, in his neighborhood. And at the time, we were looking at the size of the opportunity to work with neighborhoods, just 400,000 of them across the U.S. I'm originally from a tract home neighborhood in Northern California. And so I understood what that problem would look like to try to help solve those problems. But it became very quickly apparent that it wasn't going to be just about stopping nonviolent crime, which is kind of where our mentality was at the time. In order for any crime to be solved, we needed law enforcement to be able to have the evidence that they needed. And that's when the bigger problem became apparent, that there was this real gap in being able to provide the evidence needed for police to solve crime. And so how could we help fill that gap? It was about providing the actionable, objective evidence that law enforcement really need to solve crime. And that's where we started with vehicles and license plates. It's because most of the time there's a car that's involved in a crime, and somebody drives into an area, commits a crime, drives out, whether it's a neighborhood or a city or wherever it's happening. And so kind of the very first focus was, we need to think beyond just serving neighborhoods. We need to think, how do we help serve the entire community and give them the evidence they need to participate in solving crime?
So this is where I think that beginning of the collaborative approach that's so critical to Flock's entire thesis now came about was, okay, we have neighborhoods. Now we're starting to serve law enforcement. How can they work together? How did we expand upon that and keep collaboration at the core of everything we do at Flock?
There's just a challenge when there's this constant issue of crime that's occurring. And so I think that the way this stuff really started to evolve was just listening to concerns from law enforcement. What are the problems that they're not able to solve because they either didn't have the right evidence or they didn't have enough people, or it's problems from the community of saying, I don't understand what law enforcement's doing. It doesn't feel like what they're doing is maybe in line with what my values are. And I think that's what really started to shape over the last several years here was, instead of either coming to any sort of a public forum with our own biases and just stopping there, was to embrace what other people were saying and listen to them, whether that's building a new product or that's standing up in front of a city council and listening to them. I mean, we've probably all heard these old adages for many, many years that if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. And for some people, that might resonate and be true, but for a lot of other people, that just sounded like it was tone deaf. And I think that there was an opportunity to instead kind of flip the script and say, I hear you. Your concerns are valid. And so here's what we're going to do to try to mitigate the risks that you're really concerned with. And we started that here at Flock about 4 or 5 years ago, where we have a whole team now that's built around this kind of city council movement. And the idea behind it is, let's listen to the concerns of the community. Let's address them directly. Let's hear when they say there's history here and there's been pain in this community. Well, let's develop some policies to help address some of the core issues that you're dealing with. Or maybe there's some product design stuff that we could fix. And I think that the company's been really good about evolving to meet those needs. Again, through things like the 30-day data retention by default, things like the usage policies that we promote. I mean, we stood up in front of about 1,200 different city councils around the country for hours. I mean, hours I've sat. I remember Oakland, California, 6 hours of city council meeting. And the whole time that we were there was for like a little 6-minute thing right near the end. But just the hours and hours of the public debate on how should this technology be used. And I think it's a really important thing that Flock has been trying to do. It's been ingrained in our DNA.
So what I think is really interesting about what you just said is how we're listening to all of these different stakeholders. So listening to law enforcement to build the products that they need, but then also listening to the community to make sure that these products are actually helping solve some of the challenges that they have with public safety overall. So I want to talk and dive a little bit into some of those policies that we've put into our products and that we recommend that law enforcement adopt. So how have we built that into the system?
Yeah, so from day one of the first things, I'll give credit to the founding team on this, was having the data that's captured by Flock devices automatically delete. It was like, let's have enough evidence here to make sure that law enforcement can actually use it to solve crime. But the goal was never to create a massive repository of information that lives on indefinitely and potentially could be sold or used. The goal was like, let's make sure that law enforcement can use it to actually solve crime. And 30 days just kind of became this really natural time frame to say major cities may not even get assigned a case for a week or two after the fact. So you can't have the data be deleted like in 7 days. It just becomes not very useful. But at the same time, you want to make sure that the community understands the concerns around how this data is being collected and used, who has access to it, and for how long. And 30 days became a really nice window. I came to learn much later after reading a ton of Supreme Court case law, which is really a great way to spend your Saturday evenings with a glass of Merlot. I just really enjoyed understanding like what rulings have been out there on this stuff. When you think about the Carpenter decision or the Jones decision, there's a bunch of these different Supreme Court case laws, and they always kind of come back to a couple different pieces of information here. It's about what type of data is collected, who has access to it, and for how long. And so that's one of those policy things that we kind of started with at Flock that we've really enshrined in the Flock ethos, which is the data should expire. The goal is not to collect it for an indefinite period of time. And so I think that's like one of those examples that you mentioned, but there's so many other ones. Again, we encourage all of our customers to have a usage policy of their devices that they get from Flock. And I think that helps establish this idea of transparency with the community. It helps ensure that law enforcement understand before they acquire this technology, what's the acceptable terms with which they're going to use this stuff, and helps the community really understand ahead of time. Barry Friedman, who's a professor, wrote this book called Unwarranted, and he talks a lot about this. And the idea is that we want to ensure that we have democratic authorization to use the tools responsibly the way that the community would design them to be used. And that doesn't mean you get sign off on every single piece of the puzzle, but it does mean that you stand up in public and you let the public understand what technology is being used and how is it being used. And so that's, again, a part of Flock's DNA is we want to be held accountable. Like, you know this, like we talk to reporters. Like if there's real journalists, we want to talk to them. If there are city council members, we want to talk to them. If there are any sort of democratically elected governing bodies, we want to talk to them and make sure that we can explain how the technology does and doesn't work. We are not going to be responding to every person that's out there who has an agenda, candidly. But if you want to have an honest conversation about this stuff, I would love to entertain it. Let's
double click on what you talked about there. The the interesting thing that I think about the team that you've built at Flock that goes in front of these city council meetings is just like you can an agency can pick and choose the Flock products in our entire ecosystem that work for their needs. We also go in front of vastly different communities and vastly different city councils.
Yeah.
And they choose the policies, the products, and the technology that works for their community. What are kind of the differences that you've seen there, and how do we support all those communities choosing their unique way of approaching this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things that we established at Flock is what we call our ethical creed. The ethical creed is kind of an internal document that we use to validate the decisions that we're trying to make. It's kind of a decision-making framework. And one of the highest order values on that chart is ensuring that a democratically elected governing body is the one who's choosing what they want to do. We don't decide what the laws are in the country. California has very different laws than Texas has, right? California is a sanctuary state, and they have different rules around immigration enforcement or things that they're going to do there. Texas, very different. Within those states, there's cities that have very different uses and rules and ordinances. The beautiful thing about Flock technology is that it's adaptable to any community and any environment. And our perspective has always been, we want to give the tools for law enforcement to do the job that they have been hired to do, which is enforce the laws that they are either legally or socially required to go enforce. But it's not our decision to determine which laws to enforce, which laws not. That's not our call. And we've actually said from the get-go that Flock's not the one making this decision. But we do honor the democratic process. And so we will say that, yes, if the majority of people have decided on these rules to be enforced, we will acknowledge that, yes, that those rules should be enforced in that community. And I think that's an important part of the Flock ethos is we listen to the customers. We listen to the people. We want these tools to be used in accordance with the law.
What I'm curious about is you've built a policy team at Flock as well. And what do we sort of think are best policies around these technologies broadly, right? What are we supporting in different states across the country?
Yeah. So again, it goes back to that ethical creed, right? I think another thing that I would mention is I'm not a lawyer, but I made sure that we hired lawyers who understand the laws better than I do. I'm reading a bunch of books and I'm trying to interpret it to the best of my ability. But I want to make sure that we have actual experts on our staff, people who are from law enforcement, people who are not from law enforcement, people who are from red states and from blue states. We built a diverse team because I want actually all of the opinions brought in-house so we can have a debate on how these things should be used. But going back to the ethical creed, it comes down to, is it actually providing the objective evidence that helps communities solve crime? That's actually a really important question that we have to ask. Is it objective? Does it actually help law enforcement do their job better? And then do their job, where are they? What is their role in society? And if you're in a different locality, the laws might be slightly different there. And so we want our technology to be applied in a way that's responsible and useful in those areas. And again, to your point, you made exactly the right point. We built a team of people who we hold our personal biases back and we bring to the table, what did the people want in Oakland, California, or in Richmond, Virginia, or in Dearborn, Michigan, right? These are all places that are very unique with different histories. And we want those cities to be able to bring to the table the policies that best represent what their values are.
What impact that Flock has really makes you wake up in the morning and go to work?
I'm glad you asked this because there's a bunch of different things that I would say. I can recall the first time that I remember us being actively involved in an Amber Alert situation, which is right here in Georgia. It was 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago. A 1-year-old was kidnapped by a stranger, and stranger abductions are they're almost never solved. It's usually somebody related to the person in some capacity. And so when it's a stranger abduction, they're just really hard to solve. And I remember that law enforcement locally were able to solve that in under 6 hours. And it's because they were able to use a combination of the tools plus incredible investigative techniques that they knew. And combining these things allowed them to bring that kid home safely. And that kid's the exact same age as my youngest kid. And so it just felt very relevant that this could have been any of us. Could have been me, could have been my kid. And that 1-year-old will never remember any of this. That's an incredible story to be told, unharmed, back home with his family. But more broadly, I think that that's not an isolated event. While that type of crime is heinous and incredibly difficult to deal with, there's crimes that are happening everywhere around the country. And so the thing that strikes me about all of this is, like, you go to one of my favorite cities in the world, San Francisco. That's where I moved right after college. I met my wife there. We got married, and that was where our first apartment was together. I just have a lot of love for that city. And it's a good example of where people have probably seen certain policies, certain decisions that have been made in a crime wave that have just ran through that city. And that happens in a lot of places in the Bay Area. There's a combination of things that can happen. Public sentiment can change, as we've seen in California. They can adopt new technologies. There can be a greater emphasis on, well, we actually need to rely on what the research says and have more law enforcement officers doing their job in these places. And when you get a combination of these factors kind of swirling all together, that's when you start to see impact really happen. It's when you bring together the people, the product, and the policies. And that's when real change starts to occur. And so, like the city of Oakland, over the course of the last year, there's been this major surge with CHP has put a ton of resourcing into the city of Oakland, and that has a reverberating effect throughout the rest of the Bay Area. The city of Emeryville had a great article that was listed or published like a couple weeks ago, and the chief of police was asked, like, so why was there a 20% drop in crime? Yes, they use Flock products, but he was like, that's part of it. That's not all of it. It's officers being able to do their jobs more effectively. It's the public sentiment around the way they think about law enforcement has totally changed. It's the policies that have been enacted by their elected officials have changed. And when you bring that whole swirl together, that's when 20% drop in crime. And you also start to see businesses start coming back. You start to see this kind of like idea that we have been talking a lot about here at Flock, which is, yes, our mission is to eliminate crime. But the broader picture of why do this thing, it's not to just stop a bad thing. That's important to happen, as we talked about with like the kidnapping story. But it's actually about to provide the opportunity for communities to thrive. And that's the thing that gets me the most excited, is whether it's in Emeryville or Dearborn, which also saw a 20% plus drop in crime. It's not just about dropping crime. It creates the opportunity for communities to be revived and thrive. Because just think about it, like, this is what we see all the time. It's the American dream, is you want to go to a place, and public safety is a prerequisite for a thriving community. There's a lot of other things. You need food security, you need housing, you need a good economy. You need a lot of things to thrive. But if you don't have safety, you can't have any of the rest of those things. It just doesn't exist. And so you need to have safety. And when you do establish that, the opposite effect occurs. You start to see population increases, like in Prosper, Texas, or in Caldwell, Idaho. Unbelievable growth in those cities. New businesses come. New jobs are created for people. It means that there's actually more dollars, more taxable dollars back into the same city. So better schools, better parks, which then attracts more people back to those communities. So it becomes this virtuous cycle of growth and opportunity. And that's the country that I want us to live in. Is my perspective is the goal is not just to stop crime and put people in jail, and that's where we've had success. That to me is not success. Success for me is when a community is seeing this revitalization. Right here in Atlanta, the South Downtown Atlanta was a huge revitalization effort. And one of their core initial tenets was, we need safety here first. And then businesses are booming. People are living there and thriving there. And that's what I want to see across the country, is more opportunity for growth and opportunity.
I think what's so interesting about what you just said there is this concept of feelings of safety, right? Yeah. It's not just literally like number of crimes solved. Yeah. It's feeling like you woke up in the morning and you feel safe, you feel good, you feel like you can go about your day and thrive. Yeah. And one thing I think is really cool and exciting about what Flock is doing this year is we're now coming out with products that are sort of more safety focused products, right? So you talked about your sort of why. I have a number of them as well. But one thing that's exciting to me is on traffic safety and traffic analytics. Yeah. Both myself and my dad have been on bikes hit by cars. Yeah. Thankfully, we're okay. But people don't think about this, okay, feeling safe on roads. That's so important. Where do you think Flock is going in terms of our actual product and our ethos, thinking about these broader themes of safety and impact?
I think that there are like different phases that cities are in. Mm-hmm. I think there are some cities that are just straight up struggling and that need help. They need an immediate need to go solve a violent crime wave that's happening. Luckily, a lot of cities in the last 4 or 5 years have had a kind of a mentality shift a little bit, a paradigm shift, if you will. and they are embracing technologies like Flock. They're embracing new policies that help curb some of those root cause issues of crime. As we know, like one of the greatest deterrents of crime is the certainty of being caught. It's not about the severity of your punishment. It's not about being locked away forever. It's like, if you know you're going to get caught, psychologically, many people don't commit those crimes. That's not true across the board, but there's a lot of research that points that is true. So cities might be in different places with kind of like what their problem set is. They could be experiencing, like a lot of cities, a crime decrease overall, right? Dallas, Texas is seeing like a violent crime decrease right now. And that's an incredibly great thing. So I think that products should be built that serve each of these different cities depending on where they're at. Some people need objective evidence today, go solve these violent crime problems. Some cities need, I've got so much information and data, I don't know how to use it appropriately. AI tools, there's different other systems that can be used that can help make sense of that data to make it easier to do their jobs and solve crime faster. And then there are some places where it's actually not that crime is the primary issue. They need technology that can help increase the overall safety of the community. So to your point about traffic, I mean, how many tens of thousands of people are killed on roadways every year? I think it's like
40,000.
40,000. And it's, a lot of these things could be stopped, right? If we had a better system for maybe moving the traffic or better traffic patterns or flows. And so I do think like that's like the evolution of where this technology goes. It starts with the immediate need, and then it evolves into this place of, okay, but how do we optimize these places so that our communities thrive and they can actually get goods from point A to point B safely, or people from point A to point B safely without having the real risks that we see today.
Flock in 10 years, what does that look like to you? What do people wake up and feel like in that city?
In my dream of that city 10 years from now, there's a different mentality that people have in that city. And it's that it's almost like reframing this thing that people say, like, what's the worst that could happen? And they have the mentality of what's the best that could happen today. And you reframe that perspective because your mentality is like, I'm not even thinking about safety concerns. My kids play in the cul-de-sac. They're fine. They can walk down to the neighbor's house and it doesn't even matter. I think it feels like there are jobs and opportunities all around us, that the local coffee shops are thriving. The local farmers market is thriving. To me, I think it feels like abundance. It feels like growth. And I think that like these back of your mind safety concerns are just not a thing anymore. Like take any sort of classic example, a parking garage at night. Sounds terrifying. Why does it have to feel that way? What if you're like, no, I don't even have to worry about it. I can just go back up to the third floor by myself and it's going to be fine. I would love to have that sort of a mentality where I've got 3 daughters where at all times I'm just like, they're going to be fine. Life is good. And like they have opportunity to thrive. That's what I want.